Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. This week, the North Carolina Supreme Court will rehear oral arguments in two high-profile voting rights cases. The cases are drawing a lot of attention, and not necessarily because of the law. They could have a big impact on the 2024 elections and beyond. The new political makeup of the court also has people keeping watch. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been covering the cases, and he joins us now. Will, welcome.
Thanks.
Let's start with some context. What are these cases? Just break them down for us.
So these are two cases. One is on voter ID. One is on redistricting, or as many people probably know it, gerrymandering. And these were both ruled on last year, 2022, and they are huge, high-profile cases. I mean, these had national attention on them. The gerrymandering case was really the first time in state history that the court had ruled that partisan gerrymandering, as opposed to racial gerrymandering, could be considered unconstitutional. And the Republican legislature fought hard against that because they're obviously in charge of the redistricting process, and they would like to have fewer rules governing what they can and can't do.
And that's because they're in charge of the legislature, right?
Correct. The state constitution says that the legislature is in charge of gerrymandering, and this court case was about how much oversight should the judicial branch have over that. Should it be 100% up to the legislature to do essentially whatever they want, or should courts be able to kind of rein them in a little bit? The other case, voter ID, deals with that exact topic. Should you have to show a photo identification when you go to the polls? And the court in that ruled that was written by Republican lawmakers with racially motivated intent when they came up with that law. And the legislature obviously was very displeased with that ruling. They said that is not at all true. They acknowledge that while other laws that they have passed have been struck down for the same reason, for racial motivations, they said there was no proof in this case that it was racially motivated.
And so why are they being reheard?
Simple answer, the legislature asked for them to be reheard. They came to the court in January and said, hey, we think that y'all got this wrong, and we think that you have the power to right that wrong, to fix this, to redo the case and redo the opinion, and you should. And the court said, yeah, sounds good, let's do it.
Now, and that's the controversial part. It's not just about these cases, right?
Right, it's about the timing. So these cases, when they were heard last year and when the legislature lost both of them in these really big, kind of, embarrassing, high-profile fashions, it was a Democratic majority court. And the rulings in both cases were completely along party lines. All four Democrats ruled against the legislature. All three Republicans dissented and said that they would have ruled in the legislature's favor. So then the 2022 elections happened, and Republicans flipped two seats on the court. And suddenly it became a Republican majority court. It no longer 4-3 Democratic, now it's 5-2 Republican. And they took power in January. A couple weeks later, the legislature came to them really just quoting from those dissents that the Republicans had written just a few months prior and said, hey, these dissents are really the right opinion. This is what the opinion should have said. We think the court, needs to address this. And lo and behold, the new Republican majority agreed to it. And that has obviously caused a lot of consternation. Both, among the remaining Democrats on the court were furious about this, and also plenty of people out in the, both the general public and obviously Democratic political circles.
So is it normal? Does this happen often that the Supreme Court will just rehear a case on the recommendation of the party that lost?
Not at all. It's not completely unheard of, but before these two were granted in February last month, there had only been two other cases in the entire last 30 years. And in all of state history, there's really only been a handful of cases like this where the court has come back in and said, hey, we need to actually go back and revisit this. And so that has also been part of the objections to this, is that the court is kind of maybe overstepping its bounds to achieve this goal by side. And the Republican justices say that, hey, this rule allows us to do this. If a party says that it was incorrectly heard, we think that there's plenty of precedent in state law that says that we have the power to do this. Now, on the other hand, you just have the reality that it's been very rare that it has happened. And oftentimes it's for more minor issues, like the court realizes that they forgot to cite a case that they meant to cite. And so they have to kind of rehear the whole case as an excuse to rewrite the opinion to cite the case that they meant to, but just forgot to.
So what happens if these rulings are reversed?
Well, big implications probably for 2024. Obviously, we don't know when the rulings would come out. There's no strict deadline. They could rule on them a couple months later. They could rule on them a couple years later. But we would expect to see a ruling probably, since these are being heard in just a few days, probably by the end of this year, maybe early 2024. And that obviously leaves plenty of time for them to go into effect for the 2024 elections. And, these are about elections law. That's the whole reason why, millions of dollars have been spent on these lawsuits is to, Republicans want them in place. They think it's going to help them in the elections. Democrats don't want them in place. They think it's going to hurt them in the elections. So this is, big, high stake stuff that, and, won't affect just 2024. It'll be in place forever until potentially some other court decides to come in and undo the undoing of the decision.
And one of these cases is currently before the Supreme Court. Could a ruling at the state level have any effect on that case?
Oh, for sure. And that's actually something that the Supreme Court wants to know. We saw that there was news just recently. The court, I don't know if they watched WRAL or what, but somehow they heard about this case and said, hey, guys, the state court is redoing this. Like, y'all need to tell us what you think this is going to mean for your U.S. Supreme Court case, because this is the big case, that Moore v. Harper case that made tons of national headlines last year. Is, Democrats say, could end democracy in America, and Republicans say it's just common sense and how the founding fathers actually meant for things to work. And the crux of that case is basically that state courts should not be allowed to rule election laws unconstitutional, at least as they apply to federal elections. And that would be not just for North Carolina, but the whole country. And so the U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, this case is based on an appeal from the state Supreme Court case that y'all lost. But if you end up winning that case now that they're redoing it, do you even have a case to bring in front of us anymore? Actually, I talked to House Speaker Tim Moore about that recently, who the case is named for. And he said that he does want the Supreme Court to still take this case up, even if he ends up also winning at the state level now. He said this is such a big issue, as I said, not just for the state, but the whole country, that they think they're making good argument and, it deserves to be heard. And, he pointed out they've already had the oral arguments. The case, it's not like the Supreme Court would be saving any work by dodging it right now. It's all done except for the writing and potentially the arguing among the justices.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about other ways state judges are flexing their power. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the new Republican majority state Supreme Court. Well, North Carolina elects its judges. So what happens if the political affiliation of the court flips back? Or are we just going to be watching a tennis match? I mean, is the law of the land sort of going back and forth? What's going to happen?
That is the really big question here. I've talked to several people about this because we're really in uncharted territory. As I was saying earlier, this is something the court has done in the past, but never to this extent, especially not on big, high-profile political cases like this. And so there is a concern that, by undoing these precedents, the judges could be creating a new tactical precedent that, whenever the majority of the court flips, they can come in and undo cases they don't like. And, how far back in time can they go to do that? I suppose they can't resurrect people from the dead to make them come back and re-argue cases from the 1800s, but, from the 2010s, early 2000s, who knows? We'll just have to see. There's no way of predicting what future judges might do, or even when Democrats might take back power on the court. We know that it's probably going to be years just because of the way the elections are timed. They don't have unless people resign from the court or pass away or something like that, it's going to be years until the Democrats do have a shot at taking back control.
I would imagine there are a lot of people out there who want the courts to be independent. Are they dreamers? Could that actually happen? Who's out there pushing that?
It could happen. They are dreamers for thinking that it will happen anytime soon. We used to have nonpartisan elections in the state. We actually used to have a law that attempted to kind of keep big money out of the judicial races. Those all went out the window after Republicans took over the legislature, and we now have partisan elections. We now have millions of dollars from both sides being spent to, elect the judges that, national Republican Party figures really want and national Democratic Party figures really want. And yeah, so that has, everyone you talk to who's involved in judicial politics, I've talked to plenty of former Supreme Court justices about it. They all say that, yes, the courts have absolutely gotten more politicized, really starting in the 90s, but continuing to ramp up just over the past few decades. And there are people, especially on the Democratic side of the aisle, who want to go back to that era of nonpartisan elections and campaign finance restrictions. But that just is not a popular idea at the Republican-controlled legislature. And what you hear from Republicans on that is, back then, people didn't know anything about the judicial races, and you saw that in the elections. You would have X number of people would vote for president, and then only like half that many people would vote in the judicial races. They say now that we've, changed these laws and allowed a ton of ads to be run on TV about the candidates and for candidates to have on the ballot, whether a Republican or Democrat, you now have almost, the same number of people voting for president as you do for judges. And, there's still a drop off, but it's not nearly as much as it was in the past.
How else has the Republican-led court changed? Or are these cases the only thing?
No, there are some other changes, at least in the works. I actually reported on this a few weeks ago. Again, after the new majority took over in January, they started floating some changes to really concentrate power at the state Supreme Court and kind of essentially by taking some power away from the Court of Appeals. And what they would do, they would make dissents at the Court of Appeals less meaningful than they are now. One of the rules that we have on the books now that a lot of lawyers really enjoy is if you get a dissent at the Court of Appeals, you automatically get the right to go to the Supreme Court, which, the logic behind that is, hey, if judges disagree on what the law says, we should figure that out. But, that's not how the U.S. Supreme Court operates. They get to just pick and choose which cases they're going to hear. And so, this rule change would kind of bring North Carolina more in line with that. There's several other changes. We'd heard potentially that there was going to be, a law soon to raise the retirement age that would essentially be aimed at allowing two high-profile Republican justices to finish out their terms without having to retire when they hit the current mandatory retirement age, which is 72. So there's definitely some changes in the works. And, there's also some non-political stuff going on too. They're starting this whole e-courts thing and, finally getting into the 1990s here by letting people file court cases online and, look up files online and things like that. So there's a lot of changes afoot. Some are political, some are not. But yeah, certainly the courts are an exciting place to watch.
So what do you expect to happen this week?
Well, I know that on Tuesday, right before one of the first cases heard, we're going to see a lot of protesters in downtown Raleigh. They're going to be at the state capitol, which is, for those who don't know, just right across the street from the Supreme Court. And they plan to, make their voices heard, say that, they're worried about this power grab happening in both the legislative and judicial branches. They say it's kind of a coordinated action by the Republican Party, using their control of both those branches of government to really just cement themselves in power. And we'll probably go there, see what they have to say, and then step inside and watch the proceedings unfold.
And procedurally?
Well, both sides will get some time to make their arguments, and then it's just a waiting game. From there, the justices are going to go back and, they have private deliberations to decide, okay, how do we want to rule, who do we want to rule in favor of, but, exactly how should we craft this? Should we do it in a really broad way? Should we do it in a really narrow way? Should we, acknowledge this argument that the other side made? Should we not acknowledge that argument? And, I think probably most people think that the justices pretty much have their minds made up since, we should point out they just heard these same cases a couple months ago and, came down with pretty clear rulings. So I wouldn't necessarily expect the arguments to change that much, except you'd probably see, a flip in who's in the majority and who's dissenting.
Well, I know you're going to be watching. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran. For his coverage of the state Supreme Court, visit the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletters.
Leave a comment and share this video with your friends. With daily uploads, there will always be a conversation.